Welcome to another edition of the Mael Time Podcast. I'm Daniel Mael. I'm joined today by Jonathan Schanzer, Executive Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, survivor of the first couple days there of the Iranian ballistic missile attack on Israel. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be with you.
All right, first, just for those of us who have never experienced what it's like to run for cover from a ballistic missile, can you explain a bit about what that was like and how the feeling on the ground kind of transpired as the events unfolded?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny, but when the sirens started going off that first night, Thursday night, the first thing that I did was I just sort of casually got up from bed, was thinking, all right, another Houthi missile, one missile, ballistic missile, but the Israelis have been pretty good about knocking those out of the sky. The Arrow defense system, when you look at the figures, the percentages, they've done really well against these one-off strikes out of Yemen, and that's what I thought we were going to get. And but as I was sitting there in the stairwell of my hotel in Jerusalem, I started reading, and it quickly became clear that this was something that I'd never experienced before. And just to be clear, Daniel, I've been in Israel during Qassam rocket attacks, kind of mid-range type stuff on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem fired out of Gaza. I've been in Israel during, Hezbollah attacks as well, and Houthi one-off missiles. But when I started to realize that this was a bigger war, right, that Israel had actually gone on a preemptive strike and that we were going to start getting Iranian responses soon, that's when I realized that I needed to have a conversation with our delegation. I was there leading a 18-person delegation. And, I knew that we were going to start getting hit with waves of missiles, like what we saw last year. Israel sustained a couple hundred missiles out of Iran in April of last year. And then again in October. I knew they were coming again, and that there would be direct hits. And, and so as those next couple of days unfolded, we were scrambled out of our room, usually 2 or 3 times a night. I got to say, I didn't sleep more than 2 hours most nights. I've never run on that little sleep. That was hard because you start to your brain gets foggy. You get fuzzy. There were people who, weren't waking up. There were people that were self-medicating. There were people, the stress is real, because these are missiles. When you talk about ballistic missiles, these are projectiles that are about the length of a bus with literally a ton of explosives in the warhead. And so if they make contact with a building, they are going to destroy it. If they make contact with a road, it's going to be a large crater, right? These are not like small impacts. These are huge booms. They're creating fires. They're creating explosions. This is no joke. And so, we had to take it all seriously. I will say Jerusalem was spared. I think the Islamic Republic probably understands the sensitivity in the Muslim world of attacking Jerusalem, given its, holy status. And so I think from that perspective, maybe I was a little lucky, but it's a harrowing experience to know that you're in a country the size of, New Jersey, and that you're being targeted with hundreds of ballistic missiles that have that kind of payload, that kind of threat. And to also know that the Israelis, their air defenses are incredible, but nothing is hermetic. Nothing is guaranteed. And, as the war has gone on, the Iranians have learned what works and what doesn't. And we can see just, here on Friday that, more direct impacts were made by the Iranians.
Can you help us understand a bit about the Iranian military? Obviously, yeah. Israel knocked out a bunch of its leadership, and in the war of propaganda, you're going to have opposing armies make statements that kind of invigorate the base and make everyone feel that they're trending in the right direction. Now, I truly believe Israel is doing an amazing job and is trending in the right direction. But when you say Iran is learning and making adjustments, how sophisticated is the Iranian army?
look, let me just say, they don't have an air force right now. Israel's destroyed it. They don't have air defenses. Israel has destroyed those too. Um, their their ground forces are not reaching Israel anytime soon, right? What they have right now is a missile array, and that's what they're using against Israel. That's their only tool right now. Cyber-wise, I think they've got nothing. Their tools are limited. What this is, if you look at what's going on right now, it's a sort of a two competing timelines for these two actors. You got the Israelis hunting down Iranian scientists, nuclear scientists, destroying Iranian nuclear facilities, so they're neutralizing the ability of the regime to be able to make a bomb. There's really only one site left that is of any significant concern, and that's Fordo. That's embedded deep inside a mountain, and that's why people are talking about possible U.S. involvement. So that's on the nuclear side. Then what you have is the missile array. The missiles are still a threat. Now, there's a couple things to look at. One is what the arsenal looks like, and I'm guessing right now there's 1,500 or so missiles left in their arsenal that they can still fire at Israel. The launchers, I don't know how many there were, but the Israelis have apparently removed them by half, which is significant because you can have as many missiles as you want, but if you don't have the launchers, they're not getting up in the air. And so that's the Israeli race right now. They're trying to get rid of as many of those launchers and as many of those missiles as possible. And if they're able to do that, then the threat is by and large neutralized. And that means that, Israelis, if they wanted to put boots on the ground to destroy Fordo or to extract the enriched uranium or to literally go and hunt down the remaining leaders of the regime, they'd be able to do it, but they can't do it until that's really done. And then what the Iranians are trying to do is they're probing. This is physics at the end of the day, and they're figuring out as they go how to make their ballistic missile attacks more lethal and to be more precise. We already know that they've hit, energy infrastructure in Haifa. We know that they've hit at least one building in the Kiryat in Israel's, sort of Pentagon in Tel Aviv. They've been dangerously close in the past to the Mossad. They know what they're looking for, but they also understand where Israel's missile defenses are stronger and where they're weaker. They're poking and prodding, looking for ways to penetrate Israeli skies. And so it's a bit of a chess game that's going on here right now with two competing timelines. But I think bottom line is, and you got to remember this with every war, this is about both sides trying to impose their will on the other. And I see the Israelis having an edge, but I also see them as having a major vulnerability, right? These air defenses that they have, it's by and large, by the way, the Arrow missile anti-missile system. That's the ballistic air defense system that the Israelis have. It's finite. I don't know how many, it's one of the most closely guarded secrets in the Middle East is how many Arrow interceptors Israel has. We don't know how many they have right now, or we don't know whether those stocks are beginning to dwindle. The U.S. has, of course, deployed THAAD, which is the Terminal High Altitude Anti-Missile Defense System. It's not as good, quite frankly, as the Israeli system. They, I think, are like 65 or 70% interception rate, whereas Arrow is like 90 or 95. But all of it, right? It's just a question of, can the Israelis absorb another 1,000, 1,500, or 2,000 ballistic missile strikes before their skies are totally vulnerable. So we are potentially looking at a war of attrition. The only way you get past that war of attrition is for Israel to find all those rocket launchers and all those missiles, or to have Iran capitulate, to surrender. And that, I think, is what Donald Trump is trying to push them to do. I hear from the French also that that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get Iran to surrender. But just remember, the Islamic Republic, its ideology is, it's death to Israel. It's death to America. If they surrender to Israel, America and Israel, are they still the Islamic Republic? Can they do that? And that's kind of one of the fascinating questions that will have to be answered in the coming days. At least I hope.
Well, I want to get to that, but real quick, just as we're talking about the ballistic missile capabilities, for those of us who are relatively ignorant about these things, how long does it take to actually manufacture a ballistic missile? How long does it take to manufacture a launching site? And same goes for Arrow. What's the timeline to replenish that defense?
So, the Iranians have lost their ability by and large, as I understand it, to make ballistic missiles. This was what the Israelis did back in October. I think at one point were able to produce, 100 or 200 a day. And then after the Israeli attacks in the fall, it was like they were able to make like 2 a day. And now I understand it that, at least as I understand it, the Israelis have destroyed the capability altogether. That they just don't have they don't have the facilities now to be able to produce these missiles. So right now it's what they have, and for them it's use them or lose them. They're trying to get as many of them out as they can. I believe that some of them, and this is fascinating, some of them may have been hacked before they've been launched. Some others may have been, their GPS capabilities have been jammed midair and they've fallen inside Iran. Some of them are just, they're not made well. They're crappy missiles. As I understand it, it costs like $100,000 or $200,000 to build in Iran, but they cost $500,000 or $1 million in the West or in Israel to build. So it's not terrific construction, and some of these have been falling apart even before they're launched. And so we're watching the dwindling of that capability, but that doesn't mean that anybody's safe, because there still is a significant stockpile. Then you've got the Israelis with the Arrow. I don't know what it takes to produce these. What I understood was, with the Houthis firing every other day or every 2 days or 3 days or whatever it is, that I don't think the system in Israel was overly concerned. They felt reasonably confident that they'd be able to handle that. When you start looking at, the saturation attacks of this regime and what they're trying to do and what they're effectively able to do, where they're getting 3 or 4 direct hits per several dozen or 100, sometimes 200 missiles launched in unison, that this is this is causing harm in Israel. And as a result, you're seeing buildings that are getting hit. You're seeing people that are being injured. Now, I should also just note that the folks that I've talked to in Israel have told me, and this is, I don't want to belittle anything that's happened here, because it is horrific. And I got to tell you, I feel some PTSD right now. And I don't ever feel that way. But when I hear a loud noise, I jump, right? And the Israeli people are going through some serious stuff right now. And I don't want to minimize it at all. There have been 24 deaths. There have been a couple of thousand injured. There have been entire buildings that are going to have to get torn down, chunks of cities that are going to have to be rebuilt. So I'm not minimizing any of it. But what I am hearing from my friends in Israel is that this war is going better from that perspective than they had anticipated. That they thought that by day 8 of the war, that there would be far more deaths. There would be far more injured. There would be far more infrastructure damaged. And so it's going well up until now from their perspective. And this is macro, right? Like, when you run a country, you have to think about not just, gosh, I need to save this many people. Or you're thinking about what is going to stand when the fighting stops. What kind of critical infrastructure do I need to protect to make sure that the country can continue to run after absorbing massive numbers of missiles? And from what I understand right now, they're pretty happy with the infrastructure that's still intact. It's almost all intact. And the number of dead, very small, relatively speaking. Every soul, of course, is mourned. In Israel, everybody knows everybody. So it's already people are feeling the pain of all of this. But as I understand it, things are going better. And when we look at these 2 timelines that are playing out, Israel's got air superiority over Iran. They're picking apart the regime right now as we speak. And the damage incurred on the Israeli side is less than they had anticipated. That's the good news of all of this. The bad news, of course, is that Israel still is sustaining massive numbers of ballistic missiles, and they can't stop them from being launched, at least not yet.
And of course, we can't forget that there's still 53 hostages, roughly 20 of whom are alive. And I think if you were to ask any Israeli politician or military leader, if you look at the military achievements, say from October 8th until now, in terms of uh, the death toll and destruction within Israel, I don't know that they would admit it publicly, but certainly privately, they would say that it's going well, quote unquote, which is kind of a weird feeling. As you said, every single soul is mourned. Uh, and who knows what this will mean for the hostages in terms of leverage that Hamas or Iran has. You mentioned the religious status of Jerusalem, and also the absolutely horrible nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the leadership. Is that is the religious status of the leader of Iran considered? Because as I guess Trump says, he's the so-called supreme leader. But is that a concern in the Islamic world? What happens if Israel were to take him out?
I don't think there's a lot of concern across the Muslim world. You got to remember, Iran is a Shiite country. They are 20% of the Muslim world. So they're kind of a minority. Most of the Sunnis, the majority of the Muslim world, truly detest the Shia. And so they see this guy as kind of an abomination. And by the way, as a threat to Saudi Arabia, a threat to the UAE, a threat to, Egypt, Jordan. I mean, it's hard to actually think about a country that sees themselves as allies of the regime in the Arab world. I mean, you have countries that have been undermined and eroded from within, like Lebanon, but they're fighting back right now. The Lebanese government's trying to regain control to weaken Hezbollah. You've got Shia militias loyal to Iran inside the country of Iraq. And that's something that I think I'm continuing to watch. You got a pretty sizable Shia population there, but by and large, I don't think that this religious status of this cleric is really, something that is compelling to the majority of the Muslim world, the majority of the Arab world. But as for Jerusalem and its status, I do think that well, first of all, there's not a lot of strategic infrastructure that Iran needs to hit inside Tel Aviv, or rather inside Jerusalem, as opposed to Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has a massive amount of military infrastructure that they're
Right.
trying to hit. It's not just the major population center of Israel, but it's also where the headquarters of the IDF is, right? The Kiryat. So you see a lot more attention on Tel Aviv, more population, more military assets. There's just not a lot to hit in Jerusalem. And on top of that, this question of, can you imagine how the rest of the Arab world looks at Tehran if they kill Palestinians in East Jerusalem? I
Of
mean,
course.
really interesting. They had one direct hit, as far as I know, in the neighborhood of Abu Tor, which is kind of a mixed Arab Israeli area in the eastern part of the city. And but there's not been a whole lot more beyond that. And I think really by design from the Iranian perspective, at least for now.
So FDD has been under attack from, I'll call it the anti-Semitic right. I don't need you to necessarily agree with me, but people like Tucker Carlson going after Mark Dubowitz's country of origin, saying, Canadian, what does he have to do with our foreign policy? And using, I would call it, they use the word neocon as a slur to go after people that are of the right and actually believe that there is a importance and a value in having American influence in the Middle East and standing up for our allies. How much of that noise do you think actually gets to President Trump and impacts the decision making as we see with Iran and other issues going forward?
Look, I mean, let me frame this just a little bit before I get specifically to your question. There is a debate within the Republican, kind of MAGA world right now. People have talked about it as, neo-isolationists versus, sort of traditional Republican foreign policy, where we look at America as a force for good and for change in the world. And there are significant divisions within the party. This is not abnormal, by the way. I mean,
Like, guys, can I just want to push back on one thing. I think it's abnormal in the sense that it's not. These are straw man arguments. It's not a discussion. It's one thing if we say, hey, there's a debate about what's the best path forward, or what does America let the Israelis do? Do we really need to? Do we give them the weapons, or do we do it? What's the best thing? They're actually claiming that FDD and others are warmongers who love war, who seek chaos.
okay. So
And
let's.
yeah,
So
it's not. It's like it's not an
yeah.
authentic argument. I
No,
guess
no,
my
but
point.
let's
Yeah.
differentiate the, Tucker Carlsons, as we call them, right? And this is a guy that was literally bringing the Qataris on his program, and and treating them like royalty when they should be treated like
And Putin.
and Putin. So let's set aside people like that right now from what the actual arguments are, and the arguments are legitimate. In the sense that I think we have to think about two things that they point out, and I think we should address them here. One is that the U.S. should be keeping its powder dry for China, because China is the existential threat to the United States. Iran probably isn't. At least that's their argument, and we can talk about that in a minute. And that we need to not be burning munitions so that we're ready for whatever happens next in the Taiwan Straits. And then there's the other argument, which is that America should not get mired in the quicksand of the Middle East, that we've done this before, and that state building is a fool's errand, that trying to democratize the Middle East is a fool's errand, putting boots on the ground in the Middle East is a fool's errand. So let's address both of these things.
Wait, but I have a question. On the second part there, is anybody even saying that? Like, I haven't seen anyone saying that. That's why I'm so
think that's what's
confused.
implied in some of this. I mean, even like J.D. Vance, I think, has basically said this, that what they're doing is they're looking at Bush administration, Obama administration policies, and they look at how we ended our wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, and how they ended in collapse and embarrassment for the United States, and they don't want to do that again. And so, look, first of all, let me just say, I think that China is a real threat, and that we ought to prepare for it, right? But an Iranian regime with a nuclear weapon is also a threat. And then I think we ought to be doing whatever we can to prevent Iran from going nuclear, because they call for death to America. And usually when people say these things, they mean them. And if you look back at the history of Iran's involvement in the region since 1979, they have been targeting Americans as much as they're targeting Israelis, right? Hostage crises and killing of Americans on the tarmac after, hostage situations on planes, hijackings. You've got people, American servicemen, hundreds of them, that have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in the war on terror writ large. The Iranians have been up to their eyeballs in anti-American terrorist attacks, and they need to go down. Right now, here's the great news: the Israelis are doing the vast majority of the work here, right? And so then I think the question becomes, and this is what Donald Trump is wrestling with right now, is what is the blowback if the United States gets involved? Because right now, I think the U.S. is thinking probably about dropping bombs on two targets. One is Ali Khamenei's bunker. The other is the Fordo nuclear facility, which is the last remaining facility that is intact, and really only the U.S. can get to it by aerial bombardment. And that means dropping a massive ordnance penetrator on Fordo by a B-2. And it's only the U.S. that has those capabilities. The Israelis don't. The question I think that Trump is trying to deal with right now is, what is the likely backlash? Will we see sleeper cells activated in the United States? Will we see attacks against American service members, attacks against U.S. bases, attacks against American diplomats abroad? Are these things possible if Trump engages? And that's what he's trying to figure out, is are we going to get mired not with boots on the ground, because we're not putting boots on the ground? And are we going to get mired not because we're trying to, spend millions of dollars for regime change? We're not doing that either, right? Or billions of dollars, more to the point. What we're talking about is, what's the backlash militarily, asymmetrically, against the United States And I think it's fine for the president to be weighing those options right now as Israel lays waste to whatever it can that belongs to the regime.
I really hope that that's the debate, because the way that it happens on social media, and obviously social media is just social media, it's not real in the real sense, but I'm a little bit nervous that perhaps decision makers are actually looking at this kind of stuff and just how obsessed the president and some of his staff and associates are with that space. Because what you're describing as a discussion, I have yet to see that in any real way,
Well,
and
right,
those platforms, because they're
right.
all
Well, look,
talking about,
what you're
oh, you're
getting,
trying to put boots on, and nobody's asking for that.
no one's asking for it. But look, what you're getting on social media is like pure unadulterated anti-Semitism, and just disgusting, right, messaging that, by the way, may even be coming from outside of the country, influence operations that are, sort of trying to stir up anti-Semitism, anti-Israel perspectives. Don't put it past the Qataris, don't put it past the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese. I mean, they're all playing in this space right now, and I think that's something real to think about. But if you ask me, is that what the president is thinking about? I don't think so. And so again, this is a question of, does the U.S. have a dog in this fight? I think the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be involved fully. By the way, they could just give the Israelis whatever they need in order to get the job done. And, look, that's the model here. Israel's doing what it should be doing. It's an American ally that is fighting for its own interests, and I think really America's interests at the same time. And the U.S. has to decide whether it wants to put a finger on the scale to end this thing sooner and to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Because I do think that the Iranians, if they can make a dash to a bomb, even a crude weapon, they're going to try it. And I think the Israelis have done a lot to prevent that, and they should be getting pats on the back from the United States. And by the way, I also will just say this about the neo-isolationists. If they would shut up for just a little bit and to give the Iranian regime the sense that the party is unified behind the president in whatever he wants to do, that gives more leverage to the president. And that makes the Iranians feel weaker and maybe more inclined to capitulate. But instead, what's happening right now is every time Tucker Carlson comes out on air and he gives voice to this idea that, we're a divided nation and that we're at odds with ourselves, the Iranians believe that they may be able to parlay that they may be able to exploit that. And that's why I think these people ought to shut up if they want to try to prevent a war. If really what they're trying to do is to prevent a war, then let the United States look as scary as possible. That's how you end the war, because Iran knows they cannot survive a joint assault by the United States, the most formidable military in the world, along with the Israelis, who are already dominating them day after day. They have been up in the air, flying nonstop, right? Every time an F-35 is done with its business over Iran, they fly back to Israel, they get refueled, they get a new pilot, they get new weapons under the wings, and within a matter of an hour, that plane is back out bombing Iran, and that's been going on for 8 days straight. If the United States enters into the fray, they are toast, because they're already starting to smolder. You can see it already. They're starting to buckle. And so, look, all of this is to say that these neo-isolationists, I understand some of them. There are thoughtful ones who are really asking the tough questions. And then there are those who are, they're dog whistles for anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment. I think we need to separate out the policy argument from the anti-Semitic drivel. And it's important not to conflate those, because I do think that there are serious strategic questions that need to be asked.
And I just wish there was more space for it, because, of course, if someone were to come to me as an American and say, do you think we should send tens of thousands of troops into Iran? I would say absolutely not. If you were to ask me, do I think that you should proactively do this if Israel isn't insisting on assistance when it came to an air raid, I would say absolutely not. When you were to say if America should have taken all these steps that Israel just took, I would say absolutely not. And I just wish there was actually a more thoughtful policy discussion, because so many of these things are just, oh, there's a genocide in Gaza. Look what you're doing to Iran. And it's just, this is just not a real discussion.
Yeah.
And
You know, I got to tell you
yeah,
something. If you're looking for coherent messaging on social media, you know, I'm sorry, sir. This is a McDonald's,
no, well,
right?
no,
I mean, right? I
of
mean,
course, except for the fact that if you look at the press conference yesterday with the White House, uh,
the press
Caroline
secretary.
Leavitt,
Yeah.
yeah, right. The two of the first three questions mentioned Tucker by name when Trump sat down the day before, and it's like, it's it's crazy. I mean, even when he's sitting there
But let
trying to
me
say
just
that,
say,
yeah,
I got to say, when I was in Israel, it's funny, as we're speaking right now, I've got Channel 12 from Israel on my screen overhead, and I'm checking it incessantly right now. And the news there is, it's serious. It's deadly serious, right? I'm watching what's happening on the ground. I'm watching what's happening in terms of the deliberations of the Israeli government, the messaging that is, you know, being disseminated to the Israeli public about, you know, this war. Those are serious headlines, and it's a serious narrative to follow. What I watch here upon coming home, right? Just got back from a week in the region where I'm taking incoming fire, right, on a regular basis, and I come home to this idiocracy that we're watching, right? The media narratives are totally unserious. And
correct.
you know, I just got to say, I don't know what happened to us, but you know, this, we're not actually debating strategy right now here in this country. We're not debating, you know, the benefits of engagement. We're not debating what it looks like if the United States ends a war that it didn't start, but is able to end it on the right terms, right? Sort of like, you know, what happened after the U.S. bombed, you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it, you know, it led to the capitulation of the Japanese, and it also led to a new world order, right? And this is the kind of stuff we should be thinking on the one side, while also warning about what happens, what the dire consequences could be on the other. That's a legitimate debate about the use of American power and what happens after it's used. Okay. Then what you have is this other stuff, which has been a clown car. And I think we need to acknowledge that it's a clown car, right? This is, not every influencer should have influence. Not every influencer has a brain cell in their head that is devoted to this kind of stuff, right? We should be listening to generals. We should be listening to people that have been doing foreign policy for years, historians. Tucker Carlson is none of those things, right? And a lot of these other clowns don't belong out there. What gives them the right to weigh in on this stuff?
I love when they say the forever war. We're not looking for another forever war. And I said, this is a regime that took power in 1979 with the goal of death to America, death to Israel. And there are people making serious policy arguments saying that we should end their ability to influence the United States' behavior and safety. And you're saying that that's a forever war by asking to end their influence. How it doesn't even make sense. But again, there's all these terms, and it's quite crazy. Just kind of a wild concept here. If do you think that the state of the hostages could potentially be at play with a ceasefire negotiation with Iran?
Look, you know, what's amazing is just, anecdotally, everybody was still wearing dog tags and yellow ribbons, whoever we met, in Israel. The hostages are still near and dear to everybody's hearts, and they're still on everybody's mind. Um, I do think that Israel's dominance in Iran right now is not going unnoticed by Hamas, Hezbollah, all of these terror groups. Look, I mean, there's sort of two schools of thought here. One is that they're saving up and getting ready for a big barrage in concert with Iran, and then we might have kind of the Ring of Fire resurrected, or that they're simply unwilling or unable, or both, to engage as military support for Iran. If it's the latter, then I think there's a chance for some kind of a deal, but it will only happen after Iran has capitulated or has been defeated. Right? Once these proxies begin to realize that their patron's gone and not coming back, well, then they may have no choice in the matter. And so I do think that there is a possibility for an outcome like that. I don't know how to put a percentage on it right now because things are still so fluid. This war is still happening in real time. And, I talked about those two timelines. We have to wait and see, who starts to emerge as the front runner here. And if it becomes clear that the Iranian regime is collapsing or it's on its way to collapse, well, then Israel's got leverage with Hamas, and with and with the Qataris. But I got to say, with the Qataris still involved in this, I hate it.
Well, I was
I
going to
mean,
ask you, are the Qataris sweating yet or no?
no, I mean, I think they're still throwing money around all over Washington and beyond. And they're sort of Teflon right now. My hope though is that if the Israelis are able to gain the upper hand and maintain it in Iran, that's when we really should be seeing Stephen Witkoff and Trump squeeze the Qataris like nothing we've seen before, saying, you're the last patron of Hamas at this point. I mean, it's basically the Qataris and the Turks. If the Iranians are out of the picture, um, this is the moment these are supposed to be two American allies, and they are duplicitous, truly garbage regimes in the region, and we need to take out the trash.
Is Steve Witkoff capable of doing that? I mean, he said that the Emir of Qatar was doing God's work, and he also, on a personal level, received a bailout from the Park Lane Hotel with Qatari money. So, do you think Witkoff is actually capable of doing that?
Look, um, without getting into his background or any of that stuff, he answers to the president. President tells him he wants a deal done in X, Y, or Z ways. The question is, does Donald Trump want things to be done a certain way? And if the answer is yes, then Stephen Witkoff will make sure that they're done that way. And so it's all going to come from the top right now. And so I'm more curious right now, not about Witkoff, but about what people like Marco Rubio, and others who are in Trump's immediate circle, what they're telling him, how they're advising him. Like that's Ratcliffe from the CIA, it's Kurilla from from CENTCOM. These are the people that I think are the important ones to watch.
Jonathan Schanzer, I really appreciate your time. Glad you made it out of Israel okay, and God willing, there'll just be continued better news. And as we were coming to record this, there's major strikes in Israel, so God willing, those will cease, and there'll be better days ahead in Israel. And in America, we can resort back to our normal lives and not have to deal with ballistic missiles flying overhead. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, Daniel. Take care.
Thank you.